Everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Earthshock, the sixth story of the 19th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. Earthshock is the 122nd story overall. It's 4 parts long and is written by Eric Saywood. So, the plot of Earthshock is as follows. The mysterious disappearance of an archaeological team is merely the prelude of a deadlier threat for the Doctor and his companions. The Cybermen want to destroy Earth and will use any means at their disposal. The Doctor's ingenuity is stretched to its very limits as he battles to defeat the Cyber Army at any cost. But even he does not realize just how high the cost will be. So that is the plot of Earthshock. So, Earthshock. Whew, what to say about it? Now, I just think Earthshock is an incredible story. I would say that Earthshock is probably one of my most watched Peter Davison stories, and funny enough, Earthshock was actually my first ever Peter Davison story. I watched it when I was 9 years old. I think I saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel where in the summer of 2008. I think they were showing some classic Who stories, and Earthshock was one of them. And I thought it was very cool then because and my 9-year-old self never would have thought they would see a companion die. But fast forward through 14 years later, I've seen a fair few of companion deaths. So Adric was pretty much a trendsetter, even though his death was more permanent than any other companion death you actually saw on Doctor Who. The production was very good. I really liked the underground cavern set where the first half of the story took place, which was very spooky and atmospheric, and of course the freighter in the second half took place. It was also quite atmospheric and spooky. Yeah, it definitely helped showing how scary and dark and atmospheric the story was. The special effects were quite good for 1982, and if I do think if Earthshock did get a special edition released, or maybe they had advanced it on the series season 19 Blu-ray collection, I think they probably would have been updated. I love the Cybermen March theme, and especially it really helped with the story's atmosphere, and it captured how terrifying the Cybermen were, especially when the bits in the part 3 cliffhanger when the Cybermen were just beginning their descent to the freighter. They were just in an army, a group of 3 just like marching towards it was very chilling. And I did like the silent credits that rolled over the Shattered Star badge of Adrix. It was obviously Adric had died, so I thought it was a very nice touch. And it reminded me of like EastEnders or Corey or something. Whenever a character died, you have these silent credits rolling. The script was very good, and I think the direction by Peter Grimrod was very brilliant. And I think this is definitely, I do think that Grimrod is better than writing than he is with directing, to be honest. Say he was better at directing than he was at writing. So the plot of Earthshock was quite good, and obviously we have the Cybermen returning for the first time since 1975, and their surprise was actually kept a secret. And when Earthshock first aired in 1982, and I would imagine it was a big shock when it aired, and I think it was a very well kept secret by John Nathan Turner and the crew, because John Nathan Turner actually turned down a chance for the Cybermen to appear on the Radio Times front cover, but he didn't want to because he would spoil the Cybermen returning, which was unfortunate because this is only in his 9-year tenure. He only gets like one story in his era that's in the front cover of Radio Times, and that's the 5 Doctors. But obviously, because this plot twist was so big, I think over the years after Earthshock aired, it pretty much became like a well-known spoiler that the Cybermen actually do return in this story, thanks to social media and in the current day, and maybe even these online chat rooms that are pretty much dominant in the early days of the internet, and also the fact that that the cyber lead is actually on the front cover on the DVD, as you can see right here. So you pretty much know that the Cybermen are pretty much in this story. Plus, if you haven't, even though I think it's one of the more well-known stories, even though one might not be too familiar with Classic Who or Earthshock or something like that, you probably know that the Cybermen do actually appear in the story and a companion actually dies. And I do think that Earthshock is definitely the best Cyberman story since Tomb of the Cybermen. And even though there was only like 3 Cybermen stories that aired between Earthshock and Tomb anyway, so there's not really much to compare, so to speak. But I do think so because Earthshock pretty much takes the Cybermen in a direction that leads into the other stories in the 80s with the Cybermen. In addition to the Cybermen returning and looking also we do have Adric's death at the end, and it was actually foreshadowed quite a few times in this story, and the circumstances of his death. Like the first instance of foreshadowing was in part one, where the Doctor, Nissa, and Tegan were outside the TARDIS, and they found some dinosaur fossils, and they were talking about how the dinosaurs became extinct, and the Doctor was saying that he wonders how he's always meant to go back to find out what happened to the dinosaurs, because he says that a meteor couldn't have wiped out the dinosaurs themselves. It was probably something bigger, and that something bigger turned out to be the fucking freighter that Adric was on that killed him. I think in a second instance of foreshadowing was when the Doctor and Adric were talking in the TARDIS after the whole ordeal of the cyberbomb, and how Adric was pretty much the Adric and the Doctor pretty much making up for being angry with each other, the whole shit that happened with Adric wanted to go back to E space, but the Doctor didn't want to take him back. But then he said he doesn't want to go back, but he will need it when he does want to go back eventually, and that pretty much is the second nail in the coffin for Adric's fate, and the third and final nail that pretty much seals his fate was when he's ordered by the Cybermen to stay on board the freighter and he tells the Doctor and Tegan that he will see them again. That pretty much seals his fate, so to speaks. But I did like how the final twist of this story is pretty much which showed how the Cybermen pretty much there was something that caused the freighter to go back and like a few or like several million years back in time to when the dinosaurs became extinct, and that's how the dinosaurs became extinct because the freighter crashed into the Earth's atmosphere, and that was quite a good twist, so to speak. How tense Earthshock was, and the tension was very much present at the start of the story, especially with the Cybermen's androids pretty much destroying or disintegrating Professor Carl's crew in the caves, and their lethal. The laser beam was quite lethal to the extent you would literally just disintegrate if you coming across if you're like in front of it. Also, I do think that the cyber bomb subplot in part two was very tense, and how the Doctor was struggling to try and defuse the bomb was quite tense, and it was just you were literally just on the edge of your seat, just watching to see how the Doctor does it. And I think the story even became even more tense was in part one. I think it was in part four when the Cybermen had reached the freighter and they were just killing everybody left, right, and center. We only saw like a few of these deaths, but then there was a point that you were literally seeing like dead bodies just all over the place thanks to the Cybermen. I think that was quite scary and pretty much made the Cybermen more intimidating. And I also liked how very good the continuity was here. And as I said before, John Nathan Turner loved his odd references here and there from from previous stories, and Earthshock is no exception. And this story actually does reference Adric's debut story, Full Circle, and as well as the other E Space trilogy stories. Well, when I say the others, I think it actually references Full Circle and Warrior's Gate, not necessarily State of Decay. So the first instance is Adric does want to go back to Pterodon instead of Alzarius because of what happened because of the Marshmen coming over and pretty much causing havoc on the planet itself and the Starliner, and obviously the dog and Adric was, and then when the Doctor did tell Adric it was not possible, he said that he'll probably bump into Romana or something and he'll meet up with her and he'll take her back and he'll go with her or something like that. And then also I think another final bit of continuity was in when Adric died, when the freighter was about to crash into the Earth's atmosphere, he literally was holding onto his brother Varsh's belt. And as soon as the impact was made, and I thought that was quite a good scene as well, which I'll explain a bit more later. And Earthshock also references previous Cybermen stories, especially when the Doctor defeated the Cybermen. Actually showed clips of the Doctor, whoever the Doctor was that faced the Cybermen. They even showed like mentioned the events of the 10th Planet, Tomb of the Cybermen, and Revenge of the Cybermen, showing different clips from those respective stories. Not necessarily Tomb of the Cybermen, because around that time it was still missing. It wasn't returned to the BBC archives 10 years after Earthshock aired. And so in lieu of Tomb of the Cybermen, they literally just showed a clip from the second Doctor in episode 6 of the Wheel in Space. It was still quite cool though, so I do think Earthshock does have some very memorable moments for obvious reasons. The part one cliffhanger being one memorable moment, and this was when the androids were like the Doctor, Nissa Teague, and some of Lieutenant Scott's men and Kyle were pretty much hiding behind the rocks. And then one of the androids looks at the Doctor, and then it's revealed that the Cybermen were watching from their ship. And then the Cyber leader is like saying, destroy them at once." And that was a very obviously, if you're watching the story for the first time, your jaw would probably would have been on the floor. And of course, the ending of the story when Adric died for obvious reasons, and I'll speak more about that later on in this review. But there are some other moments in the story that I actually do like, especially when the Doctor was able to defuse the cyberbomb with Adric, and how then the part 3 cliffhanger when the Cybermen were pretty much emerging from their pods to invade the freighter. And then they did this in the effect of like this. They actually like got the same shot, just put it in like three different, like it was like they shot the scene three times. So obviously, every time the scene was used, they pretty much just put it like one by one the side one against just side by side by side to make it as if there are a lot of Cybermen coming. That was also quite cool. But obviously, I think if the story is made today, we definitely have seen a lot more Cybermen. I think another part I did think that was quite sweet was when the Doctor and Adric were pretty much making up for arguing in part one. That was also quite a sweet scene of, and obviously the scene when the Cybermen were pretty much making their way to the space freighter actually does remind me of the tomb of the Cybermen when the Cybermen were just were emerging from their tombs. I thought that was a scene that was very reminiscent of that. So on to the performances, I do have to say that Earthshock is definitely one of the best acted stories in 80s Who. And I think one scene in particular that actually stands out was Adric's death, obviously, and not just Adric dying. We have like the reactions of the Doctor, Nissa, and Tegan in the TARDIS. And obviously, we literally have Nissa screaming Adric's name in the TARDIS, obviously distraught, and then when the freighter does collide with Earth, we just see everyone just so distraught, just distraught in the TARDIS, especially Tegan. I think that piece of acting is very well done, but I'll get into that a bit later. So let's talk about Peter Davison. He was brilliant in the story, and I do think that Earthshock is definitely one of his best performances as the Fifth Doctor. And I really like how the Doctor and Adric's relationship was pretty much examined in the story, and even Matthew Waterhouse even said himself that the reason why the Fifth Doctor and Adric were pretty much clashed most of the time was because the Doctor did actually see himself in Adric, and Adric probably reminded the Doctor of his younger self. So that was pretty self-explanatory as to why because both of them are quite stubborn. Well, not as well. Adric's not as stubborn as the Doctor, but the Doctor does have his stubborn moments, and obviously this is pretty evident when Adric wanted the Doctor to take him back to E-Space, but because of what happened in the E-Space, the Doctor thought it was too dangerous and refused to accept his request to take him back to Pterodon. But after the ordeal in the underground caves, Nissa and words of encouragement by Nissa and the Doctor, Nissa and Tegan, the Doctor decides to go and actually speak to Adric and make amends with him. And I thought that was a very sweet scene, and it shows how good Peter Davis and Matthew Waterhouse are good as a duo, and also and it pretty much explains why the Doctor and Adric have a very good relationship. Because as I said in my season 18 reviews, the Doctor and Adric do have a teacher-student relationship which was pretty evident in how good the chemistry Tom Baker had of Matthew Waterhouse. Was very much like a mentor-student relationship with Adric, pretty much learning things from the Doctor, and even their conversations themselves was very much as if the Doctor was teaching Adric a thing or two. And obviously, like the stunned silence from the Doctor when Adric died, and obviously Nissa and Tegan was very distraught, trying to get him to like acknowledge what just happened. Matthew Waterhouse was brilliant in the story, and I do think that Earthshock is one of his best stories. It has actually his best performance as Adric. So Earthshock is an Adric-centric story, which is pretty obvious because the guy actually dies in the end. so Adric is pretty upset with how he's mistreated by the Doctor, Nissa, and not more so the Doctor than less Nissa and Tegan, and he asked the Doctor to take him back to E-Space, and obviously the Doctor refuses his request because what happened because because of their ordeal in E-space. But then Adric does tell the Doctor that he can actually calculate a way through to E-space and how they can get out of E-space without any difficulty. And obviously the two clash. Imagine the two actually do make up at some point in part 2, which I said before was quite sweet. I also like to see when the Doctor mentioned that the Cybermen can be defeated by gold. They were pretty much they found gold lethal, and Adric had like a silent eureka moment, noticing that like the golden edges of his badge would probably be useful in killing the Cybermen. And Ringray, he was suspicious and was trying to confiscate the badge from Adric, but then the Doctor, Briggs and Berger pretty much ambushed Ringray and attacked him. And I also liked how the lead up scene to Adric's death. It feels very much like the Doctor, who was pretty much defiant to the end. It actually does remind me of Logopolis, when the Doctor was trying to stop the Master by trying to disconnect the cable to prevent the entropy wave to coming into Earth or something like that. And obviously he knew it would be dangerous, but then the Doctor still wanted to try and save the day. And I thought that was quite cool. Aristotle was great as well, even though Nyssa does pretty much stay in the TARDIS for at least the second half of the story, but which means that it's pretty much Nyssa's turn to be put on the back burner. But she does actually do some impressive things in the story. Like, she pretty much manages to destroy a Cyberman in the TARDIS when it was going to kill them. And I also liked how she was pretty much encouraging Adric to try and make up with the Doctor after their argument. And I liked how she was pretty much the first one to cry after Adric's death, because Nyssa and Adric were quite close, very much like a brother-sisterly sort of relationship, because they were like pretty much the same age as each other, almost the same age. And I think even the actor, even Matthew Waterhouse and Sarah Sutton, I think they are the same age. I think one of them is a few weeks older than the other, but I think that's how it showed how close they were. And obviously, when Adric met her on Traken, they were pretty much working together to help the Doctor to defeat the Master and whatever was going on. And in Logopolis, Adric was very happy to see Nyssa, and that was a good scene. And I also liked how Nyssa was quite sad when she saw that the Cyberman was killed by, when Carol was killed by a Cyberman. I liked how distraught she was when she saw that. And Janet Fielding was very good as well. She does get in most of the action of the story, and she even borrows Professor Cowell's overalls so she can join Lieutenant Scott and the others in the recce and exploring the freighter and looking for the Doctor. She ends up losing them, because she does get captured by the Cyber Leader, but the Cyberman is taken to the Cyber Leader, where she meets Adric for the last time and the Doctor. And I really do admire Janet Fielding's acting during this scene, during Adric's death scene, because I said before that she was very much in shock of what just happened, and she was trying to get the Doctor to acknowledge what just happened. She was like, Adric, no, Doctor, Adric, and then she suddenly just burst into tears into Nyssa's shoulders. But in reality, I think Janet Fielding and Sarah Sutton were pretty much trying to hold back laughter for some reason. But I understand though, because if you're trying to act out like these, if there is a serious moment and you're trying very hard not to laugh, sometimes I do feel that. So I understand where that's coming from, but it was just very. But even the effect, they were trying very hard not to laugh, and they quickly just turned their faces away from the camera. But it was actually very good, because it made it look like as if they were just in tears after what just happened. But it still worked very well. So onto the side cast, they're all quite good. So first off, we had Professor Kyle, a geologist, and she was doing a survival from an expedition when the Cybermen killed the rest of her crew. So Lieutenant Scott and his team found her, and they followed him, and they followed the Doctor into the TARDIS when they went to the freighter to try and figure out what was the cause of the bomb. And she remains in the TARDIS with Nyssa, but she does. And then when the others went to look for the Doctor, and she ends up getting killed by the Cybermen when they pretty much followed Lieutenant Scott back into the TARDIS. And then we had Snyder, I think one of the troops working with Scott to try and find Professor Khan, and she gets killed by the androids. Then we had Lieutenant Scott. he was leader of the troops that went to look for Professor Carl in the underground caves on Earth, and then he found the Doctor and his companions. He believed that they were the ones responsible for killing Professor Carl's crew. But then, even though that wasn't the case, when they actually did see the androids, and then he believed the Doctor was innocent, and he and his team followed the Doctor into the TARDIS, which landed on the freighter. And then Professor Carl pretty much goes out to look for the Doctor with Tegan in tow. And then he ends up on the bridge later on in the story, and he tries to get Adric to come with him to this escape pod, but Adric obviously wants to try and crack the last code so they can stop the freighter from crashing into Earth. But obviously he actually orders Adric to do so, but obviously doesn't Adric doesn't listen. So as I said, Adric was very defiant even to the end. And then we also had Briggs. She was the commander of the space freighter she was piloting but she was very eager to try and return to Earth with her cargo so she can get on time so she can get a bonus for it. But then she was returned to her own time when the Doctor when she was able to escape with Scott and her other co-pilot Berger to in the escape pod, but obviously they have to leave Adric behind. And I thought she was a very good character. She was a bit weary of the Doctor at first, but then she slowly started trusting the Doctor until the Cybermen came, and then that's how she pretty much allied herself with the Doctor. And she was obviously trying to get Adric to come with them to the escape pod, but Adric didn't listen. He wanted to crack the code. I thought she was a very good character, and then the actress Beryl Reid. I thought people thought that her being cast in this sort of role was quite strange, but I'm not really familiar with the actress. I'm assuming she's actress. I'm sure she did some other stuff as well. I'm not really too familiar with, but I thought she did a very good job, so to speak. And then we had Berger. She was the first officer of the freighter, and she was still distrustful of the Doctor, but she was the one that actually wanted to give him a chance before the Cybermen came and fucked everything up for them. And finally, we had Ringway. He was an officer on board the freighter, and it was revealed that he was the traitor working with the Cybermen. And then it was just due to the fact that he disliked working with Briggs. He was kind of similar to Adric, but he was more sinister, and he ended up getting killed by the Cybermen. Man, so we have a very good side cast, and they're all brilliant, especially Briggs. And with our enemies, we have the Cybermen. Returning after a 7-year absence, ironically, when they returned in Revenge of the Cybermen, they came back from another lengthy absence, and the Cybermen mean business here. They have a new design which is very similar to their invasion/revenge design, but their face is more defined, and their mouthpiece looks like. And they have a mouthpiece that just looks like their mouth is open, so they can actually like speak, and it's if their mouth is like it's something like this, or something like, whoop, bloody hell. It's something like this, so to speak. And this is what they look like now. What they look like in this point of time, and obviously with the early design, the previous design, it pretty much looks like it didn't have that mouthpiece. So it just looked as if it was just like something like looked like a speakerphone or something, like a speaker thing, for instance. And obviously, these Cybermen obviously had deep, intimidating electric voices as opposed to the robotic voices where they were pretty much emphasizing the every syllable as they spoke. Well, which I think is what made these Cybermen so memorable for me, and I would say that this Cyberman is actually my favorite Cyberman design because they're just I think it's mainly because of the cyber leader David Banks, because he still had that electric deep voice, whereas that the Cyberman had. It's just as if he's very hammy in a good way. So he's just very theatrical. And it's just the way he delivers his lines. So he's like, "We meet again, Doctor." And I really like that sort of. I think that really made this cyber leader very memorable for me. And I do think that David Banks actually should return as the cyber leader if he's still alive. Which I think he is, but I definitely think she should return for Big Finish or even New Who, even for at least something, because I really like this Cyberman design, and they also are quite scary. And oddly enough, I do like Cyberman stories in the 80s, except for Silver Nemesis, but I do really like this Cyberman because they're just very cool and they look very interesting and quite lethal as well. Not as silly and not as badly written as they were in Revenge, but they were quite good. So the Cybermen's plot was to basically they wanted to destroy the Earth, and the first instance was trying to destroy the Earth using a not or cause an issue to because there was a cyber conference. There was the conference to form an alliance against the Cybermen because of the cyber wars. So obviously there was the Cybermen pretty much planted the bomb in the cave in order to cause like a diplomatic issue or something like that. But obviously the Doctor was there to stop it. So then the Cybermen decided to come up with the idea to pretty much storm Captain Briggs' freighter so they can crash to Earth to cause like another major issue. But then obviously the Doctor, something caused the freighter to go back at least 65 million years to when the dinosaurs became extinct. So that's how the Cybermen's plan did work, but it was with the incorrect time period. And so I think that was a good plot of that. So the rest of the cyber fleet pretty much went away when the freighter disappeared, and the remaining Cyberman that was killed on the TARDIS, and the cyber leader was pretty much incapacitated by the Doctor when he used Adric's badge to rub the gold piece onto his chest piece, which pretty much died. But he obviously returned to attack with the Cybermen, to be honest. And the Cybermen were fantastic here, and I do think that this is, as I said before, this is the best story since the Tomb of the Cybermen, because this is where the story where the Cybermen are pretty much their own boss, and they're pretty much, and they do a whole deal of damage, and plus they're scary as well, and the Cybermen actually do get to do a whole thing to themselves. They're not following some leader or something, or they're not being held under control for somewhere. They're just turning the person controlling at the last minute to take over the Earth or to carry out their own plans or something. I thought that was quite cool. Although the only fault I have to say with Earthshock is that the Cybermen are a bit too emotive. But I guess the explanation of this is the Cybermen are pretty much upgrading, and we haven't seen them for 7 years. So I think obviously the Cybermen are like emotionless creatures, but I think they pretty much I think I would say that they pretty much decided to keep the expression, that they decided to keep their expressions to try and for it to be to try and like work with other people if they wanted to. But you do see in Attack of the Cybermen, I think one of the Cybermen do actually do like a Legate sign when something was about to blow up towards the end. And I think it was a good way. So the good, but I think it was definitely a bit of an iffy reason, or a bit of an iffy why did the Cybermen sound a bit emotive. But yeah, I guess you can say they're constantly upgrading, or maybe they're still early in the forms. Some of the emotions are still not necessarily emotions. Some of their speech patterns are still there, so they still sound quite human, so they can try and communicate with others if they want to do something. So, ladies and gents, let's talk about Adric's death, the big elephant in the room. So how it comes about is he's ordered by the Cybermen to remain on the freighter, but the freighter ends up going back to when the dinosaurs were wiped out. And then when the agent, obviously there was like some logic codes that could be cracked in order to prevent the freighter from colliding to Earth. But then Adric is about to crack the last one, but then he's told by Briggs, Berger, and Scott to trying to come with them to the escape pod. But then Adric is about to leave with them, but this is definitely a trick he picked up from the doctors. He decided to go back there in the last minute to try and crack the code, but then he's tried to crack the code repeatedly, but he comes up with the idea, but he's about to crack it, but then one of the Cybermen that was literally like barely functioning comes in, destroys the controls, and then ends up dying, and then Adric, with nothing to do, he not to just watch and hold Varsha's about and just watch the freighter just crash onto Earth whilst the Doctor, Nyssa, and Tegan can do nothing but watch because the Cybermen pretty much damaged the TARDIS controls. So that's why the Doctor was unable to save Adric, because the TARDIS controls are damaged. So Adric just pretty much watched the Earth, watched this freighter just crash into the Earth's atmosphere to wrap out the dinosaurs. And of course his final words were, "Now I never know if I was right." And then after that, bang! Adric's dead. And I do think that is definitely one of the most impactful scenes in Doctor Who history because a major companion just died and had a major impact on the Doctor. Definitely Tegan and even Nissa to some extent. It definitely explained the impact that the Adric's death had on the Doctor and when Five regenerated in the caves of Androzani. But I did say I was happy when Adric died, but after we were watching Earthshock a few nights ago, I did get a bit teary-eyed. Like, even though I'm not a very emotional person, but even though because Adric, even though he's a bit of a pain in the ass at times, you do have to remember that he is just a teenager, just trying to. Obviously, he pretty much stood on the TARDIS with. Obviously, he's away from his universe, so he's just everything is just very. I don't know if he just witnessed the Doctor regenerate. So everything was just very, like very like, just very hard for him to like try and adjust. But even the Matthew Waterhouse, he did have a very shaky start. So I think it's in Doctor Who, but you can't without that he did play Adric very well. So I did say before, Adric was very good at the Fourth Doctor, and there was that teacher-student element that they had, which made things work. But with the Fifth Doctor, the two were quite alike, which caused them to clash quite a few times. But then obviously you had the writers not knowing what to do with Adric in this season, so he's pretty much randomly siding with the villains, and it was pretty Adric's purpose was there just getting told off for what he was doing and stuff. Yes, but I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but Adric has grown on me a little bit, especially watching his time in the TARDIS in Order. No, yeah, but I still dislike Adric, but I dislike him a lot less than I did before. But I still don't really fully like Adric. But I like him just a little bit, but he is still my least favorite companion. And even though he did actually grow me in some stories. And yeah, this isn't the last time we actually see Adric, and Adric does return for brief cameos in the following story, Time Flight, and the Caves of Androzani when the Doctor is about to regenerate. So, to conclude, Earthshock Death successfully brings back the Cybermen and delivers a massive game changer for the rest of the Peter Davison era, which has definitely made a huge impact going forward. So I give Earthshock a perfect 10 out of 10. Yay! So my next review will be Time Flight, the season 19 finale. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of Earthshock and this review. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Follow me on my social media platforms below, which you find in the description box. Until then, see you later.